Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar, which is dedicated to the key findings of our survey on the role of risk management in corporate resilience, which was conducted in collaboration with the global management consulting firm McKinsey. The report with a full set of results is available on FIRMA website. And with this report, we are very pleased to have some data points to discuss on resilience. It shows that risk management has a key role to play in making organizations more resilient. It reveals that for 90% of those we surveyed, the pandemic has made risk and insurance management more important to the organizations, as you can see on the graph. It is therefore the right moment to make the most of the elevated profile risk management is having. It is the right moment to move the discussion from how to manage risk to how companies can be more resilient in the face of a number of interconnected risks. And to discuss the results of the survey and reflect more broadly about the link between risk and resilience, I'm delighted to be joined by three outstanding speakers. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Ulrich Adam Hyde, who is the head of business risk at Vattenfall, a European energy company. And Ulrich is also a board member of SWERMA, the Swedish Risk Management Association. François Malan, Chief Risk and Compliance Officer at Eiffage, one of the European leaders in construction, energy system, infrastructure and concession. François is also a board member of AMRAE, the French Risk Management Association, and he is the winner of the European Risk Manager Award of last year. And Alfonso Natale, partner at McKinsey & Company, with whom we have closely worked for this survey. Before we get started, let me remind you that you are all welcome to ask questions all along the webinar using the chat box. And I will be taking your questions during the Q&A session after the interventions. So I'd like now to turn to our speakers, starting with you, Alfonso. Alfonso, could you give us a little bit of context and set up the scene into resilience?
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. Thanks a lot for inviting us to join this this webinar. So we as McKinsey, we've been analyzing resilience of companies already before the pandemic. So pandemic has definitely increased the relevance of this topic, but as a firm, we've been looking for insights around resilience even before that the crisis made this topic so relevant for all the companies and all the organizations. And in particular, the spirit and the purpose that we were following was very much understand how we could help our clients to build abilities, not only to withstand unpredictable trade and changes and disruption as we are seeing now, but also emerge stronger from the crisis, and I would say bounce back from the crisis in a faster way. And in order to essentially collect some quantitative insight, we went through the past economic cycle, so starting from the crisis back in 2007, 2008, to understand what kind of features, what kind of characteristics resilience organization had across a variety of dimensions. So we took a sample of roughly 1,000 global companies across different sectors and geographies, and we went through the different phases of downturn, recovery, and growth to understand what kind of elements, what we call the resilience organization had versus the others, okay? So the non-resilience organization. And of course, we define in this kind of exercise resilience organization like the ones which have been able through the cycle to outperform the market and to outperform, of course, non-resilience organization. And what we realized is that, many of these companies had, common pattern across, several dimensions. So first of all, I think this company has been very effective in restructuring their balance sheet through the cycle, meaning, for example, reducing the leverage ratio in a very fast way in order to get, enough gunpowder to go through the crisis and potentially position themselves in a much stronger position in the course of a growth phase. They were also very active in terms of merger acquisition, in terms of divestiture. For example, during the phase of downturn, they've been much faster than the others in terms of disposing, non-core assets, and then much more aggressive in terms of growth strategy in the recovery and growth phase to accelerate performance. At the same time, they've been also very effective in terms of resource allocation and capex management, so slowing down capex in a phase of downturn, accelerate capex in the phase of growth. And this has allowed them essentially to gain a competitive advantage versus their direct competitors. Another relevant dimension was, of course, about productivity. So all these companies have proven to be very effective in working on cost of goods sold, so improving systematically productivity, rather than working simply on cutting SG&A costs, right? And finally, I think this is also connecting then to the point that we are going to discuss later on. I think also the governance and the operating model and the way they've been leveraging on risk capabilities as a competitive advantage has been quite important success factor. Now, if you go to the next page, I think one important element is that if we look at the recent experience and what we've observed in the past months, we have seen that corporate resilience is becoming even more important because the number and the frequency and the severity of the disruptions it's increasing significantly. If you take the example of the automotive sector, you see how the different disruption that happened in the past few months, actually few years, have had a tremendous impact on their performance, right? So if you think about the impact of COVID pandemic in terms of reduction of EBITDA, if you think about semiconductor crisis, or the geopolitical tensions between US and China, or the battery shortage, or the introduction of new regulation, this has been affecting significantly their operating model, their performance, and therefore they have required essentially a strong response from all the companies of the organization. But we should expect that more uncertainty will be ahead of us, right? So there will be again disruption along the supply chain. Cybersecurity is, we discussed several times how it's becoming a real threat for many organizations. Technological shift, fundamental shift in the way the products are now delivered to customers, are imposing basically companies to really keep on reflecting on resilience. And we believe that risk managers are really at the center of building a stronger resilience capabilities for companies. So they have a unique position to build a comprehensive view of risk, trends, opportunities, innovation, and provide essentially all these elements into the core strategic decision processes to make the companies more resilient over time.
And that's why we decided to jointly conduct this survey to dig a little bit on the role and the involvement of the risk manager in this corporate resilience. So can you present briefly the methodology we followed and the profile of the respondent?
Yes, so we have essentially collected insight from roughly 200 respondents, representing essentially the risk management population, so across different sectors and different geographies, with different degree of seniority. So we had board members, C and C-1 level. The company profile that we have involved in the exercise has been essentially, I would say, covering a global footprint. So majority of the participants in the survey have a global footprint. And also in terms of size, I would say 70–80% of the participants have turnover above 1 billion. Sorry. So a quite relevant sample of European companies. If we look at the distribution by location and by industry, this is also a good representation of the main markets in Europe. So we have, of course, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Finland, and a few others. And also a good composition in terms of sectors, with global energy and materials and advanced industry, which includes automotive, aerospace, and defense, as well as banking as the most relevant sectors represented in the sample.
Thank you, Alfonso. So I will now turn to Ulrich and Francois. But also, Alfonso, you can also respond to my third question, which is about the definition of resilience. You know, it's a term which is used to cover a wide range of elements. So how do you describe resilience for your organization? Maybe starting with you, Francois?
Yes, for me, resilience is the ability of a company to cope with a sudden and exceptional event that has a major impact on the performance of its activities. For me, it is based on two important things. A structured system, procedure, business continuity plan, backup that can be prepared by the risk manager. But for me, also something important, it's on employees, because employees should be aware and committed to the company to help the resilience. To only have procedure is not enough. The people are crucial for this.
Indeed, thank you, Francois. And what about you, Ulrich?
Yes, thanks. Well, a bit similar, I would say. So for me, now representing enterprise risk management, resilience is all about having a healthy risk culture in place and having a robust ERM setup in place, including clear governance, ERM processes, and so on. And having said that, resilience, or you could also say, you mentioned it, business continuity preparedness means ensuring and optimizing the ability of the company to operate in a variety of challenging environments. So practically for each business area or staff function, or how you call it, it means establishing the capability to continue the delivery of products and services within an acceptable time frame during and after a disruption. But first, of course, you need to have an idea of what kind of disruptions you should be prepared for. So, and coming back to my ERM focus here at the beginning, the resilience of a company can be increased by good analysis of risk and having then measures as well as plans in place to react fast. Though I would expect that most of the people could agree to my statement here, or to ours. In real life, it can be a major challenge, though, to convince internal stakeholders to increase the resilience. Of course, it could be that quite some time, effort, and cost are necessary, and that time, effort, and costs should do not show off directly, but only once the risk materializes. But then, of course, it's late. So I connect the resilient discussion, especially to the risk culture part.
Mm-hmm. And Alfonso, what is resilience for you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's interesting also to see how, what different, definition we got from the participants to the survey. And to some extent, they are all true. So they were all capturing, different elements of resilience. This is also, I think, a sign that, there is still a lot of so to say, need of harmonization in terms of what we define for resilience. I think every single organization is somehow stressing different, elements within this definition. In our perspective, I think, when we think about resilience, I will say that we try to combine two elements. On one side, I would say the capability of an organization to effectively respond to an element of disruption, to a crisis, to a threat, to a big change. But at the same time, I think the second component is the capability then to emerge as stronger from the crisis and definitely bounce back much faster than the other. So I think there is a component of response, but also a component of action and proactive strengths towards the environment, which I think is also a quite important element to consider if we reflect about, how to strategically think about resilience.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, yeah. And so concretely, because we've just spoken about the definition concretely, how did you contribute to the resilience of your organization during the pandemic, François and Ulrich? So can you illustrate by giving us an example of measure or several measures that you have taken so that we understand better?
Yeah, maybe I will start just. The supply chain was crucial So we hold a purchasing committee with the purchase team, and we tried first to find collective and personal protection equipment for our workers. So we tried to find the best things to buy, and the sooner was the better because we had to restart quickly. So I helped the purchase team to find the best supplier, and don't forget also about the compliance issue because we had to buy in China. So we conducted survey just to be sure that we bought masks to the right supplier in terms of quality, but also in terms of compliance, because we didn't have to forget this. So my first example. The second one, that we decided to implement in France a factory able to produce FFP2 masks in order to reduce our dependency from China, because at the first time it was very difficult to have sufficient production. And another example, we tried also to encourage and organize a safety return to at the office after the first lockdown. So I did specific actions with the communication and the IT team. For instance, we had a movie on business resumption, just to show our employees what were the new condition of working at our headquarters. So I was an actor, so I introduced the subject, and so we showed concretely what would be the change, how we manage with safety in our location, and also we introduced PCR tests in our headquarters, close to my office, just to help people with safety. And it was a really concrete action of the risk management, because as a risk manager, we are more, not maybe organized, but used to manage crisis. So we held the other functions to deal with this, because it was quite a huge crisis for everyone.
Okay, interesting. And you, Ulrich, any example you'd like to stress?
Yes, maybe two things. First of all, of course, the company Vattenfall, the crisis management did a lot of similar things, and it was immediately, of course, working from home and getting IT in place with a VPN and all this. But we follow the 3 line of defense governance. So if you ask me now in my role as a second line, as a control function, then I can, then of course we have been not involved in these kinds of issues, because there we had the security organization in place and so on. But they did similar things, working in shifts, that the shift in the power plants would not, the employees would not meet each other and so on. But we from second line risk organization, I would a bit provocative answer, we didn't need to contribute to the resilience, since we already steered according to resilience and risk-bearing capability. So the pandemic situation appeared to be well in line with the risk profile that us in risk management and executive management have been perceiving. Nevertheless, we analyzed the economic situation, and so we contributed to the resilience by providing a set of scenarios to top management and board of directors, how the pandemic could have evolved and how this would have influenced Vattenfall's key risk factors or would involve. Based on these, the different business areas then analyzed their what-if situation, because we of course no one knew what will happen still. So we supported with information on whether this pandemic now impacts the risk picture or not in a fundamental way. And one thing here, why I answer this is, you can of course think of root cause, focus, and effect base, and for utility, you think of the biggest risk are market price changes and so on, and then there could be many reasons why the market price would change. Could be a pandemic, could be a war somewhere, and so on. So therefore, having this effect-based focus, of course, we have thought through different scenarios before, maybe not necessarily the pandemic as such, though it has been in the risk register. But on any other root cause, the result is the same. You have to deal with the financial consequences. So that here we took not the operative part, but more the kind of steering and keeping top management well informed part. And that was our main contribution at this time.
Okay. Very two interesting, experiences being shared. And if we go back to the results of the survey, Alfonso, can you comment of what we have found?
Yes, sure, Tiffen. We have essentially asked the participants to rate areas where their organization have taken action since the crisis. And what essentially we realize is that, as also Francois and Ulrich have said before, that companies have clearly focused on, two dimensions. On one side, the workplace safety, and on the other side, the remote working and managing through the pandemic. More than 75% of the participants said that the implementation of these measures has been mostly completed since the crisis began. While other dimensions like supply chain or insurance strategy emerged, I would say, more as a weak point. And I'm happy then to also, of course, collect additional feedback from the speakers. As you know, some of the actions have been taken and implemented, some others are still in the making, right? And of course, I think if we reflect on the supply chain side, which was one of the elements that we also discussed in the bilateral session that we have during the survey, there are, of course, the time lag between the activation of the actions and the full implementation. At the same time, we are also coping with critical market situations. For example, if you think about the insurance strategy, of course, the possibility for companies to expand and to review a bit the strategy on this front is also limited by the appetite in the market, right, at the moment, or the condition that the market is offering to companies about it.
And I'd like to come back to this point. It's interesting to see that over 1/3 of respondents in the survey said that they do not plan to make any change to their insurance strategy. Does this finding surprise you, Francois, Ulrich?
It depends, because the question was as a consequence of the pandemic. So for me, it's not a surprise, because I think it could mean that some companies did not wait for the pandemic to review their insurance strategy because of the hard market that appeared 2 or 3 years ago, especially for those with recurring claims and certain unattractive activities, mines, coal, oil and gas. The others start later, often under pressure from their management to reduce fixed costs or to find ways to cover business interruption that were not compensated during the pandemic. Because the insurance strategy can mean two things, either transferring less to the traditional insurance market by self-insuring, captive, excess, or putting pressure on insurers to cover better at acceptable price, and it's a question of risk appetite. So for me at Eiffage, it was not a consequence of the pandemic, but of the hard market. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of risk managers, they don't see insurance as a magic solution. At Eiffage, we are risk takers. It is in our DNA. So we buy insurance only when it is compulsory, for instance, construction in France, or when we don't mitigate a risk because it is too new or deadly. So today we prefer to focus on cyber insurance than in business interruption without damage, because it's a risk difficult to appreciate.
And Ulrich, any views?
I can't contribute a lot more. I don't have insurance in my area, but what I understand from you, Francois, it sounds like it's similar with us. I mean, we are a North European utility. We are not aviation industry or something which were hit really hard. So compared to this, I mean, we are reassessing insurances, as you said, all the time, and also with all this cyber focus and all this. So maybe there, would be more interesting really to talk to someone who really went down to zero when it comes to business. That would be interesting to hear.
maybe in another webinar then. Okay, I'd like to move to another interesting graph, the one that you can see now. So the report also shows that only 16% of the respondents said that resilience is one of the top priorities of their organizational strategy. So what do you think about this figure? What is basically the role of resilience for your organization when we link it to the strategy? Ulrich, would you like to start?
Yes. Well, I'm totally surprised to see the 16%. As I work for utility, and at least utilities owning and running critical infrastructure, water, dams, nuclear power plants, and so on. So we need to have to focus on security from all different perspectives. We talk about physical security, information security, IT security, you name it. There's no tolerance owning and running a nuclear power plant. So resilience is the DNA of a utility. So therefore, maybe that's also the reason why there has been a maximum awareness on us and I guess all the other competitors in our area. And then on top of this, even if you would be a bit lame, you would have all the sector-specific regulations, authorities which check, have the laws and regulations in place because you're running this sensitive business. So I cannot imagine a world without resilience mindset at all. But yeah, 16% says a lot. So it's surprisingly low, and maybe some other areas which have been not so exposed by nature woke up a bit. And I think that's a risk manager's role also to push this message, and maybe even from the communicational departments, because very often then the reputational damage would be also huge. So that's probably a wake-up call, and that's I think then at the end of the day it's a good one.
And Francois, are you also surprised with this figure? Is it a wake-up call, as Ulrich mentioned?
Maybe, but maybe there is another explanation. Maybe because when you say organizational strategy, but resilience, maybe it was not explicitly mentioned in the company's strategy. It was implied, but it could be one possibility. The other one is it's not really organized now, or it's just in the DNA of the company. So there is no procedure on this, no organizational tools on this, because it's just the company itself. For instance, at Eiffage, we don't have a formalized organizational strategy based upon resilience, because our strategy is made for innovation, environmental transition, and digital transition. They are the core pillars of the strategic plan. We prefer to focus on opportunities than on risk. For us, resilience is not only based on business continuity plan, but also on people, as I mentioned before. So maybe the 16%, they didn't put it in word, but it's obviously in their strategy, but it's not really expressed and mentioned in this word.
Okay. Alfonso, more generally, when we look at this graph, are you surprised with the results here?
Well, I mean, if we want to see the glass half full, I mean, to some extent, we can also include somehow on the positive side, also, the blue side of the graph. So the 46%, which is making then the sum of the two, close to and above 60, which is anyway, I think, good results. But I have to say that in general, I mean, the survey showed us in many situations, resilience is still very much considered as an operational topic. So when we asked basically the participant to the survey about how resilience is embedded in their strategy, I think also the feeling about whether resilience is really a strategic topic rather than operational topic was, I think, reflected into this distribution. And I think, when you think about resilience, also from the definition that we discussed before, very often you have in mind words like crisis response, business continuity, and every single part of the organization. So if you take finance, if you take operations, if you take IT, they are all looking at resilience with their own lens. So resilience is still very much a fragmented concept across the organization, which is not helping to elevate this concept to a strategic layer. So you need to have a point of synthesis, if you want, a point where you are able to build a common understanding and a common view about the topic. And for example, I mean, recently we have been helping a company here in Europe as part of the strategic planning exercise to understand how to prioritize potentially initiative along, the elements of resilience. And we started from a sort of a quick diagnostic. So what is your starting point? Where are your gaps? What are your strengths? What are the areas that potentially we should prioritize as part of the plan? And if you make it holistically and systematically across basically all the elements of financial, operational resilience, digital, reputation, ESG, and whatever, then you realize that as part of this strategy, you always have, some gaps and some areas where you potentially need to have a strategic approach. And for example, in this case, we were reflecting about, okay, on the IT side, on the digital side, which for sure is going to be one of the core elements if we look about our strategy in the future, how you can ensure to have, in place all the elements which will make your organization more resilient. And based on this consideration, for example, this client decided to insource a lot of the IT capacity and capabilities that were used to outsource to third parties because they want to have control over such type of skills and capabilities because they consider this as a relevant resilient factor in the future. But also if you think about, reflecting on a business portfolio. So if you make this kind of assessment up front, then you may be in the condition to take also bold moves about, okay, what are the strategic moves that I have to do on my portfolio? So what are the disposals that you have to accelerate? Because, forward looking, I have the feeling that this is going to help to make our business more resilient over time. So I think, this picture reflects very well, a bit, this mixed distribution of feeling about this topic, right?
Okay. So let's move now to the risk managers' involvement in resilience. So our results show that they are most heavily involved in the operational type of resilience and crisis management, as we also mentioned before. Whereas they are not heavily involved in market positioning and brand reputation. So does this reflect with your experience, Ulrich, François?
It's not a surprise for me. But let's go, Ulrich.
Go.
Your turn. Please.
No, okay. We have a delay, obviously. No, my point is just, well, of course, the risk managers, coming back to my 3 line of defense concept, which I believe in very, very much. Of course, the risk managers there in the first line, they need to be involved everywhere. But from corporate perspective, the risk managers should not be involved in this first line risk management work. Otherwise, you lose your independent role, you lose your independent oversight role, and it's difficult to challenge first line. So you lose a layer of your control function. I'm fully aware of that. This is very often a matter of size of the organization, of the company, and of the sector you're in. I mean, you can't put all this heavy governance on some other companies. But also in my role in the board of the Swedish Risk Management Association, I observe that some company could go into it. So they are big enough. But I don't know, I'm not sitting there. I don't know why they do not do it. But I think this is extremely important, that there's a value that someone is not involved in operations and can challenge operations, because sometimes you don't see, if you're involved, you're not independent to your own decisions anymore. So you need a second opinion on risk responses, and you need the backing, of course, from top management to do this, because normally the ones you challenge, they don't wait for your challenge. So that's a governance question at the end of the day.
Okay. François, what's your view?
Yes, that's funny because I don't have the same opinion as Uri, because I work closely with the communication department. It's a good opportunity to share our view. Just to be clear, it's clear that traditionally risk managers were more involved in the management and prevention of operational risk resilience. They are the skills, their experience in this. It's okay. Market position and innovation capabilities are more strategic issues where the risk manager may have less knowledge or skills first. So it's not really comfortable to deal with this. That could be an explanation. It's the same thing for brand and reputation, which are more the responsibility of the communication departments. Although I think things are changing. We are more involved, and I work, as I said, more closely with the communication director and the HR director, because I stay independent, but we have a different point of view, so we can help them sometimes to assess the risk more efficiently than if they are doing by themselves. And the risk manager, I think, has demonstrated his ability to intervene on a variety of subjects, not just insurable risk. So his transversal intervention, his distance, and in his role also in the COVID crisis, I think will facilitate his involvement in this subject. And I think he can have an added value of this. I mentioned risk assessment, but also maybe resilience just to deal with the crisis. And for instance, at EFAGE, I wrote the crisis management procedure with the communication director. We wrote it with 2 hands. So it was really a work that we had together. So I think maybe the figure is quite low today, but if the survey is made in 2 years, it would be different, I think.
Okay. And Alfonso, are you surprised with these results at all? Is there an area where you think risk management should be more involved?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Tiffen. I also want to reconnect with the closing from Francois, because if we look dynamically this picture and we project it a few years on the road, I think there will be a couple of areas where we should expect to see a much higher involvement of risk in managing essentially resilience. The first one, in my view, it's digital, and intending digital as a combination of data, analytics, and technology. And that's because, that's, I think, will be the area where, most of the trade will come for several reasons. We discussed about, cyber before, but I think, the power of analytics and the application of analytics across the board, across different domains in the organizations, from operations to commercial, to inventory management, to quality controls. It's making the role of risk management and the importance of having reliable models behind these analytics as an important resilience factor. So you cannot allow essentially an organization to be run with models which are not properly controlled and managed. The second element is data, because data it's going to become one of the most important assets for many of the organizations. It's already like this in many industries, but that this will be more and more. And across many organizations, I'm happy also to get your feeling about it. But we are still suffering for unreliable, incomplete, unstable data sets. And this is, representing a problem, right, from a resilience standpoint, right, going forward. And the other element is technology, because technology, anyway, it's becoming more and more a source of a competitive advantage, and definitely, for the evolution that we're observing, potentially an important element to protect from attack from third parties if we want really to ensure the resilience over time. The second element, which I will mention as well, it's ESG. Also ESG, it's pretty surprising to see a very low score here, but ESG, although it's a different animal, it's very interlinked with risk. And if you think about, climate risk on one side, if you think about reputational risk, if you think about financial risk, all these three elements are strictly connected with ESG. So climate risk, it's by definition, in many industries, if you think about banking, now, regulation and supervision is enforcing climate risk structurally in the supervisory activity, but also quite relevant infrastructure, right? In infrastructure, for example, I think in utility, and Ulrich can comment on this, but also in transportation, this is becoming a fundamental element behind investment decisions, capital allocation, etc. Reputational risk is also quite important because ESG would potentially represent a reputational issue and would represent a potential element of business continuity. There are industries in which essentially the fact of not being ESG compliant is going to prevent you to keep on doing business like you used to do, right, in the past. So therefore, I think it's getting very close to the concept of resilience and what we have just discussed. And then financial risk, because again, ESG is affecting, the capability of companies to access the market, to collect funds from the market, and to have better conditions in terms of interest rates, right? So, and this means, financial risk to some extent, right? So I think it's really important to connect these two elements, and I will see that, these two elements gaining a lot of importance in the future.
Yeah, if we focus a little bit on ESG and sustainability, because for me also it was striking to see that and surprising that this is an area where there seems to be a lot of room for improvement. Any reaction, Ulrich, to this result?
Yes, I don't know. The issue is, of course, historically, risk management was very much close to controlling and to the deviation from the 5-year business plan and to the financially biggest risk. And then you would miss out these topics, at least if you would have a more narrow view on this, because as it was mentioned already, there could be reputational impacts, but if it's not really the spontaneous shitstorm, normally then you don't see the effect immediately. You would lose customers over time and so on. So therefore, and they are not very often not the biggest ones. So yeah, but the effect could come via the back door, and hopefully industries are learning that risk managers should involve into these topics, and this should be part of the strategy, or we say sustainability, that is the business strategy. So and on top of it, I am surprised also because companies in our Western world, at least, we should have our own moral compass, so to say. So we should be good citizens, and we don't want to have child labor, not because there could be a reputational damage, but because that's not according to our values. And so again, the risk may be financially minor, at least at the beginning, but a modern way of doing risk management is looking beyond the 3 or 5 year business planning horizon and taking discussions with the part of the organization affected in how far to identify and assess these risks. But the quantification may be difficult at the beginning, but that's not a reason not to do it.
Yes, for me, it's not really a surprise because purpose and ESG alignment are new for companies and risk manager. We are not sure of what it means. If we have discussion, just to give a same definition, and we need to first to assess the associated risk. That's what we are doing. But I truly believe, as mentioned before, that after this pandemic, ESG objectives are wonderful opportunities for companies to relive and be more resilient in the future. So by developing new products, new market and suppliers, this is a reason why risk managers should work closely with the sustainable development team and the HR team, and it's quite new. I work more and more closely with them than before. So I think, as the same question before, we have to have the same question in the future, and it will be different, I'm sure.
And if we continue digging a little bit, I think there is another area for improvement, which is foresight capabilities. How is your organization working with this topic, François?
So, well, it's a big, it's an important issue, but today we don't really work on this because our IT investment focuses on cybersecurity, as I mentioned, and a better understanding of our carbon emissions. That's our goal today. So the foresight capabilities is to use data, just to combine data, to use intelligence artificial and sense that. But I think I trust in the power of data combined with artificial intelligence, and it could help the risk manager to identify new scenario of risk or impact. In my opinion, at Eiffage, we use external specialists because we don't have specialists internally, but we use brokers or insurers which are working on modeling, for instance, climate change impact on our sites, because we need skills on this. And so it's important to find expertise outside if we don't have it. About the pandemic, I add the pandemic risk in my risk map, but it was not in the top risk because we didn't expect such an impact and the duration of the crisis. The problem for risk manager is to deal with black swan, and I'm not sure that data or foresight capabilities could help us. It's not a miracle solution, but we have to do it and try to find easy solutions and to help us in this.
Mm-hmm. And you are not the only one, François, not having had the pandemic on the risk register.
Yes.
You know, if I remember the COVID-19 survey that Ferma carried out last year, I think it was only 3 in 10 organizations who had it on the risk register. So, and what about you, Ulrich, about foresight capabilities? Is this an area of improvement at Vattenfall, or?
Yeah, yes, I think for everyone in these times. But just one comment more on this pandemic. I mentioned before, I mean, what is a pandemic risk? I mean, that's maybe the root cause for the financial effect you get somewhere else. So maybe also some did not have it there as a top risk because it's a root cause and you have this effect focus. The same with cyber. I don't know if many companies has cyber. I mean, politically, everyone would say cyber is a big thing, but what cyber attack leads to IT not working or production loss or whatever. So then maybe you have it there hidden. It's one of the root causes for some other effect. So that's one thing. It's difficult to capture, of course, and to decide. And with regard to the foresight, yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it's the same like with you, Francois. I mean, it's a difficult topic, and I very often think the good starting point to get awareness on different topics is very often you can be down to earth. You can think in scenarios. You can discuss black swans or swans, and maybe black for some and not black at all for the others. Depends on where you stand and what the perspective is. So same with pandemic. For some it was a black swan, for others not directly. And then if you need external expertise, you take it in. I mean, climate change impact you mentioned. We have a weather institute under contract to help us getting the impact known for the different areas of our operations. So it's different, will be different in northern part of Sweden compared to the Netherlands or UK, and different criteria are important. So how can we know in detail? So then you need to get in expertise and with the Foresight, extremely relevant for companies. Just I'm a little bit with risk management, starting there. There are so many other things we can fix without this as of today. But it would be also interesting other seminar, to be honest, to understand which possibilities, also digital possibilities, would be there. So as a non-native digital, as none of us grew up with it, there are so many opportunities you're afraid of missing out. So that's important that we be open-minded.
And Alfonso, how do you see this topic of foresight capabilities?
Yeah, this is an important aspect. I think also an element of reflection, I think, for the risk community. And of course, I mean, for the risk community, I would say that, you know, improving a bit the picture on this dimension will also require a bit of a step up in terms of capabilities, in terms of skills, and type of profile that we have in our family. I'm talking in this way also being my role of risk officer for McKinsey in the Med Complex. But and therefore it's not an easy transition. But at the same time, you know, if you look at the organization, I think, you know, improving a bit, you know, this, I think it's quite an important element if we really want to also position risk at the core of resilience management in the future. And here, I think, you know, 2 or 3 elements are really important. On one side, really strengthen a bit stress testing capabilities, which doesn't mean, which in my view doesn't mean only, you know, to reflect about extreme events like the pandemic, as we were discussing, but having a bit of a full picture about, you know, possible discontinuity. We did the example before about automotive. So if you take, you know, introduction of new regulation, shortage of specific, you know, supplies, semiconductor crisis, etc. All these elements combined together are important to be considered while reflecting about, you know, strategic evolution of a company. And of course, to do that, it's important to reflect about, okay, what are the leading indicators that you have to start tracking? How do you define what are the thresholds for activating, you know, potential escalation rules? How you engage collectively the stakeholders that you have around you, basically to collect such insight within the organization, but also outside the organization, and so on and so forth. I think the other element is how to really embed this into the processes, because, you know, foresight capabilities is also important as part of the strategic processes. So in the strategic planning, in capital allocation decisions, in CapEx evaluation, I think all these processes should be informed by such type of capabilities. And finally, I think, you know, and this is also an important element if we think about the board of directors, etc. I think having, you know, the capability to create a comprehensive transparency about, you know, relevant indicators, and, you know, we can potentially call it key resilience indicators, right? Where you combine together performance indicators, risk indicators, continuity indicators, etc. I think it's an area where we will definitely should invest as a risk community to step up, right, and to play a fundamental role in the resilience of our organization.
And I'd like to show you a last graph before we move on to the Q&A. This is this one. Voilà. Almost 3/4 of the respondents said that there's need to be more focus on risk culture going forward. How do you see it happening, François?
To develop a risk culture is a goal for each risk manager for a long time. Each employee, manager, director should be a risk manager. The risk culture strengthens resilience because it provides a mindset, risk assessment, reflex, and useful tools. What we can do, just to give example, is maybe to use technology. Intranet, for instance. In my previous position, I have developed a quarterly communication, and my best shot was a testimony of a business unit manager on the benefits he had gained from a risk mapping. That was a big victory, because it's really good to see an operational to say, yes, risk map helped me. Well, you have to find the correct and the best business unit manager. Huh? Don't. try to find it. And also, what is important to develop risk culture is to be on the ground, close to the operation, to not in your office. It's common sense, but it's better to say it. And also to develop marketing skills, because as a risk manager, you are an expert, but you also need to develop marketing skills to show the operational people that you're a business partner. You're here to help them and not to forbid things. So risk culture is really important to develop resilience, but also to develop risk management.
Mm. And Ulrich, you mentioned risk culture at the beginning of the webinar. So how do you see it could be more developed?
I think, yeah, exactly. That's key, and not just for resilience, for so many other things as well. For us, we define risk culture, or we map behaviors against 5 areas, and the first one is how's the tone from the top. I mean, you need to have an openness and transparency culture in place. People should be allowed and encouraged to speak up and to raise concerns, and that's extremely important. And then risk discussion should be part of decision making. You should really have this risk-based discussions in place. You should consider risk appetite, and yeah, then you have pros and cons in place, and you should stand these discussions, because then if you have a con, then you always have a discussion. So that's important. Risk registry is the third one. You need to capture all the risk very good, though we have learned that some of the risk you would not capture, and then you should have other foresight capabilities in place to discuss them, so you can't rely just on your bottom-up risk reporting. And very important, good governance. I mean, you should be clear in roles and responsibilities when it comes to the risk environment, depending on how your governance is. And we talked a lot about the importance of risk managers in the operations and how to learn from near misses or even misses. And all this together, you can assess in many ways, and then you see and have a good feeling for the corporate culture, and risk culture is a part of it. I think this is so key for so many other things. So and the pandemic was helpful for some companies. I know a company here in Sweden, the risk manager had a hard time getting someone listening, and suddenly then there was this she got the crisis management role on top of it, which I just criticized because I thought you should be independent, but suddenly everyone was listening, and that was so important to get suddenly a better tone from the top. And so you should, as a risk manager, step in whenever it's needed, and then show the value.
And size the opportunity, yeah. And Alfonso, is there another element of these findings that you'd like to focus on? You mentioned already, the relationship and interaction with the board. Maybe this point.
Yeah, maybe one comment on this one, because it seems, of course, that the respondents did not expect a major emphasis on interaction with board in the future around resilience. I think the reading of this number is, in my view, very much connected to the specific situation where we are. I think the board has been very much at the core of crisis response in the past months. So the pandemic has pushed companies across a prolonged phase of crisis, where of course the board and the chair and the CEO have been deploying a very specific operating model, right, in that phase. And I think the point will be more about how we can so to say institutionalize this operating model for the future. If we also look more recently to the results of the McKinsey Global Survey on boards, so in 2020, so in the acute phase of the pandemic, we've seen how corporate resilience increased relevance as a priority topic for many of the boards. While I think the same survey this year is showing a bit of step back of this topic, while I think other, specific vertical domains like macroeconomic and geopolitical risk or effects of climate risk or political risk are becoming more and more important. So I think this, resonate with what we should expect for the future. Of course, I mean, as a risk community, again, I think that the risk committees, audit committees, will play an important role to keep the interaction with the board on resilience relevant in the organization as a very important element. And also, I think, to some extent, the supervisory push across multiple sectors will make this point quite relevant in board agenda.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, I look at the time and we don't have time for the Q&A because we had such a, an interactive discussion, but we have taken note of the questions which have came and we will post a response on our webpage. So I hope that you all enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. I'm very grateful to our speakers for sharing, their experience, their views on the topic of resilience. A big thank to McKinsey as well for your great collaboration on this project, but also to Michael, Daniela, and Neha for their great work. And we will continue to work on the theme of resilience. Not only there is a Fermat Talks virtual event coming up on the 11th and 12th of October. So I encourage you to register. It's free, and to follow the discussion on different aspects of resilience. So thank you very much for joining us. You will receive the replay of the webcast in the next 24 hours, and see you soon.